Welcome, everybody. Tony UV coming to you live from the Versprite office. This is episode 11 of the Dirty South Security Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about building resiliency in both the paradigms that have shifted from security to resiliency in both security programs as well as security products. My guest for today in episode 11 is John Sapp and Brent Hauk. John is a multi-CISO who's currently right now at Texas Mutual. He is a longtime professional, and I'll let him do some intros shortly, but I've known John for quite some time. I'm excited to have John on because I've been trying to get him on this show for quite some time. We're going to have some real talk, as we always do in the Dirty South Security Podcast. And not to be outdone, we also have Brent Hauk. Brent has come into my network of being over the past couple of months. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk with him, and he's the former CISO at Anthem, now Elevance Health. Welcome, gentlemen. If you guys want to add some additional anecdotal things about your past, present, maybe even future, we'll begin with you, John, for some introductions.
Yeah, so two-time BISO, two-time CISO, still in recovery. I've been everywhere from, the West Coast out in San Francisco, where was with McKesson, to Atlanta, which is, has been my home and probably will be my home again one day. And but yeah, excited about it. Some talk about some of the things that we've shared in different circles in different events. But looking forward to it. Thank you for having me on the show.
Sounds great. Brent, as well, I wanted to make sure I didn't shortchange any of the introductions. So just for our listeners and viewers out there, a little bit about your background and come to CISO stardom, as they say.
Yeah, for sure. Spent a couple decades now. Used to have a lot more hair, a lot darker hair in these days. But the world of security, sitting in the hot seat, helping build out some large security teams at some Fortune 500 organizations. Spent most of my career in the healthcare space, CISO, CTO seats, sitting in those with some large teams, and been through quite a bit of build outs, ramp ups, you name it. Have seen a lot over the last couple of years, or a couple decades. Actually. Not quite 3, but we're getting there.
Sounds great. Well, welcome again, gentlemen. And I understand that for our listeners out there, if this is your first time tuning into the Dirty South Security Podcast, the way that we get dirty here on this podcast is that we just dive in. We have today 4 key topics. The overall umbrella topic is building resiliency, the new paradigm shift in security program or product security program management. We're going to hit the first topic is security to resiliency. But first off, I want to do a quick shout out to Versprite for sponsoring this podcast, the location, the technical equipment that we use, and the ongoing support of the Dirty South Security Podcast. I also want to do a shout out to my co-host who's not here with me today, Kofi, but looking forward to having him on for the next time. Topic 1, diving in, security to resiliency. Was promising security overly confident in the first 30 years of CISO-ship? We'll begin with you, John, and to see if you want to tackle that one. But the idea here on this one is that before we would talk about secure this, secure that, right? Security was highly prevalent. Now, in today's common speak, we're seeing the word resiliency pop up. What are your thoughts on how security was marketed before, and how do you think that that's evolved into a more resilient conversation?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is it was always about protection back then, protection and prevention. That was the storyline. That was everything that we were out to try and do. Protect the environment, prevent anything from happening. That it was that simple. And so we threw a lot of tools and technologies and things at it. And, but now we've shifted to we live in the world of, detection and response. And when you think about resiliency, it's about the ability to respond and recover. But you have to be able to detect it in order to respond and recover, and in order to stay within the risk tolerance of your organization. At what point, what's your breaking point? At what point, once you get past a certain point, does business stop? And, I think about a situation back in, it was the mid 2000s, one of the organizations I was with, it was about, the ability to recover from a disaster. And a disaster was, from a technical standpoint, was if we couldn't pick, pack, and ship, medical supplies and things to those medical organizations within a 24-hour time period, if you couldn't do that in a complete order or business, if your technology operations were disrupted in a process, if you couldn't respond and recover, we were all about protect and prevent anything from happening to, order to cash cycle, right? And so it was, but if that happened, then all of a sudden they went to an alternate supplier, and they don't come back until they have a problem with the alternate supplier or even the third one. So, it was, back then it was prevent and protect. Now it's respond and recover.
That's interesting. And when I hear you say this stuff, it's not really about throwing the baby with the bathwater with how things were done for the past 30 years. It's building on, it's evolving into, more of the detection response aspects. Brent, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think there's, if you go back to the world where things were a little more, I'll say prescripted. You had, if I'm patching successfully, if I'm updating antivirus effectively, and I'm efficient at doing that in a timely manner, I'm probably pretty protected, right? I could be fairly secure. To me, the world today is there's threats known and unknown, right? And so your constant game is how do I improvise, adapt, and overcome, right? That I don't care what you're up against. To me, resiliency comes back to that. You have to be fast on your feet. You've got to be willing to be bold and make moves. The world today and the threats we face today may change dramatically next month. There's been various sort of climatic events that have caused changes or evolutions and threats that happen out there, and we have to respond. For a while there, we're responding to keep systems on. I worked in healthcare. If systems went down, people didn't get billed. Okay, we'll bill them in another week. We'll get it back up. But then went through a whole transition where now if systems go down, people may very well lose their lives. And so it's a whole other world of risks and business, I guess, integration that has to have happened there. So security's come from that back world, keep things running, keep them up, don't want anybody in, to help us figure out how to navigate this very uncomfortable world that we're in at times, and how do we do it? You're our protective crew, if you will. So the resiliency to me comes in a lot of ways in your ability to adapt to a changing landscape, a changing threat model, a changing risk profile, and figure out ways to move the needle, even if there's not a prescriptive solution. Sometimes it requires a degree of innovation. Sometimes it requires different processes. It's not as simple as dropping a new tool or technology, and that doesn't always fix or resolve the risk.
Looking back, do you think that from a program management standpoint, you both have been in healthcare senior leadership, and for very large entities, do you feel that from a product perspective, the security tools that many leaders have had and maybe have today, that they have evolved, stayed the same? Where do you think innovation is as we prepare for a more resilient security program? John, back to you.
Yeah, so they have evolved. If you've ever spent any time in RSA, unfortunately, sometimes you see the buzzword of the quarter or of the year slapped on everybody's booth. Of course, this year it was all about AI, but technology has always continued to. I mean, as much as the threat landscape evolves, so has the technology to try and protect, prevent, detect, respond, and recover from those types of things. And they have evolved, but we've also had to evolve as CISOs, as security leaders, because back 2.5 decades ago when Brent and I were starting off in this, and one of the things that I learned is that I didn't grow up wanting to be a CISO, but here I am. I'm working on a T-shirt for that. But the idea was we were very technical, right? We had to know and understand technical things, how networks were put together, applications, and all those different things, right? Understand threat modeling and how do you understand what the threats are to the environment. And then we had to transition to adding heavy degrees of business acumen into our abilities. Just like the CIOs went, they were technical, then they were business. But CIOs, that's where they stop. They are business first. But now we've had to further evolve, just like the technologies. We also have had to evolve as people. So now we are risk managers. So we have to be a risk manager who has business acumen, who is also technical, because you got to know when a vendor is, trying to sell you a bill of goods, or if they have something that truly is emerging and solving, because it's not the problems that change, it's how you solve the problems that are changing. And so that's where, back to your question about the evolution of technologies, they are evolving in that way. And, there are some really smart people out there who are coming up with different ways to solve the same problem, because it's still find the threat, detect it, eradicate it, and, respond and recover from it. So
a lot of golden nuggets there. I like the fact that you brought up the business acumen stuff, which is, I definitely, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked John Brent, but I'm going to also get your thoughts on, on what John said about the business acumen, because, from what I see today, a lot of the newer up and coming CISOs, they are kind of oftentimes like just shortcoming the whole business acumen understanding, right? It's, I think oftentimes security professionals and leaders, they get so enthralled with security that they basically put aside the business stuff. So I definitely want to get your perspective there. But just to add a little bit of a cynical twist to the original question on product evolution over time. So yes, many of us did come back from RSA. Last episode 10 with Jen Leggio, she's a marketing veteran in security. We talked about a lot of the veneers that product people have put on to security products that, oftentimes it's just been, just kind of a thin, shiny piece of plastic over a very non-innovative engine. What are your sincere thoughts about how some of the enterprise solutions have evolved? Yes, there's some notable differences. AV has gone to EDR, XDR, but do you feel that from a resilience standpoint, tying back to that theme, do you feel that the product security companies that are out there have really prepared for a resilient type of program? That's one. And then two, definitely interested to get your take on the business acumen notes that John laid down.
Yeah, I think, from a product perspective, no, I'll say there's a degree of disappointment. I think everybody still approaches this as I'm myopic in solving my individual component and piece. I've said that. How do you come into this space new and figure out what tools do you need? Everybody will tell you that there's what they do, but I just do this one slice of it. So stack 100 of those tools together. Maybe you have a complete program. The bigger guys have acquired products and companies and innovation along the way, but sometimes acquire and die, right? The innovation goes away and the marketing begins. So from my standpoint, we don't make it simple to secure. And I think the more complex we make it, the more we do ourselves a disservice for exactly the reasons we talked about. We're in the conversation in the boardroom now. 20 plus years ago, I'm being asked to solve technical problems. How do we do this? I'm expected to sit in front of a CIO and articulate fairly quickly a technical solution to a very complex challenge, but we could do it. Today, that's not the case. I mean, today the conversations are, we're considering acquiring an organization. What do we need? Security needs to be engaged and aware. We have to have the risk conversation. I think the roles evolved to a point where I feel like one of the main objectives I've had in roles, my job is to ensure we make educated risk decisions. And so at a business level, I need to be able to articulate the risk to that how this will impact overall operations, earnings, how this impacts, employees, how this impacts our business operations, not technical. Okay, this will require another password or whatever else it is. We're much more into a higher level conversation. But at the same time, as we get pulled into that and the world gets more complex, it's also trying to keep an eye on a multi-front battlefield, right? I mean, it's gotten far more complex, and so the threats are not just we've seen a resurgence in physical threats and people coming back after things from a social engineering, as being almost more successful sometimes than technical because it's easy to convince people. So I think it necessitates people have to spend energy evolving that conversation. I like to think of myself, and I've said my main role is I'm a translator. I speak boardroom, I speak geek, right? That's sort of my thing. And that's not an easy place to get to. You get a lot of people that can speak boardroom and some people can speak geek, but you got to be able to translate to those two, in both directions. It's not just one direction; it's bidirectional.
Right. Well, that's powerful right there. Both of you guys dropping some good golden nuggets. Let's go on to topic number 2, and this one's really on product. Now, both of you have come from very iconic and very large healthcare entities. But let's think about from a product perspective. Obviously, those respective healthcare environments that you both have been a part of have either produced or consumed some level of healthcare products that are, serving physicians and patients, of course. When it comes to resiliency, what defines product resiliency? Is that a subjective statement? I mean, when there's nothing that says a product is resilient because of these attributes, if you were a product manager or a product VP and the resiliency topic came in front of you, how would you define product resiliency? John, back to you.
Oh, I was waiting for this question, Tony. So one of the roles that I had at that Fortune 10, we'll call them healthcare company, was Senior Director of Product Security and Innovation. And the whole point of what we did there, and shout out to my longtime friend and partner in crime back then, Sebastian High, who's a good friend of the program. But, because without him, I couldn't have built that. So I just want to shout out to him. But here's the thing. Here's what we did. We took a cost center and turned it into a profit center, because what we did was, in order to take security and make it part of the product that allowed us to enable our customer, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a pharmacy, or whether it is a physician group, whatever it may be, they don't have technology teams. They can't afford that. They're medical professionals, right? So they're depending on us as an organization. Don't just sell me a software product or a service, right? What I need security that goes with that. So I need to be resilient my client needed to be resilient against whether it's a cybersecurity attack or a technology outage. And so I want to define something here. We're talking about cyber resilience, not just, and to me, the word cyber covers both cybersecurity and technology. Cybersecurity is that combo word that's specifically about cybersecurity, whether it's an attack or protection or otherwise. But cyber, I use that to define cybersecurity and technology because, I sit on the customer advisory board for, I'll call them the number one EDR product globally. And, we all know what happened on July 19th. But what they did was they responded. They were resilient. They allowed my current organization, to be resilient they responded and recovered. No, it wasn't a cybersecurity attack, but it was a technology outage which disrupted the business or had the potential to disrupt the business. And whether the risk is a cybersecurity attack or a technology outage, whether it's a security technology or some business technology, who does the risk reporting for technology risk? We do. Mm-hmm. So that's why those patches and all those things that we talk about that Brent mentioned, we still have to provide visibility for that informed, educated, risk-based decisions, right? So resilience takes all of that into account. And that's how, so what we did was we helped those clients become resilient, whether it was understanding the technology that they were using, which we were providing back then, and their ability to make sure that it's patched. It's why we all use SaaS applications today, right? We know it's always going to be on the latest levels of patches, whether it's the OS behind it or whatever the case may be. No more than N-1 on the software itself. And, that's why there are all those, the GRC components of this, the things that controls and all that stuff. But, you look at it and it's how do I help that organization become resilient against those things, protecting the data.
One of the things I liked what you said there, John, was the fact that there's that duality when it comes to cyber resiliency. It's not just about security, but it's also about the technology, right? Uptime and continuity. So I like that. I think that kind of falls short in the minds of many that, kind of understand, especially, we all see what we want to see. And in the cyberspace, we see just the security side oftentimes, but that duality, I think, is powerful. Brent, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think, let's go back a little bit to the other piece there. They tie together. To me, it's if we're talking about I protect against ransomware or I protect against this or that attack, we're having the wrong conversation, right? We're protecting operations. We're ensuring the organization is resilient. We make sure. I'm in Tampa here, right? That the Tony Dungy defense, we bend but don't break. We understand that the environment may sag, performance may not be great. We may have a little bit of outage from time to time, but we recover. We're able to maintain operations. The business can still function. So our tools have to be effective, have to be resilient, but they have to do that to enable the resiliency of the business, and that needs to be the main communication focus. Because if you're focusing on your resiliency of your tools, your IT environment, even, you're missing the points, right? The point is the resiliency of the overall business and their operations to ensure they can continue to be effective. So that has to be part of the communication vernacular. Often people want whiz bang, sexy, net new in some way. It's not. To me, it's a lot of grind. It's a lot of managing the minutia, mastering the mundane. That type of thing. You've got to go back and block and tackle. You've got to have the right communication. You've got to be thinking about the business. But I think we've got to educate that business on the resiliency side. Not all things can be solved by technology. Some require decisions, some require planning, some require robust processes on what we do when X, Y, or Z happens, knowing we've all been around long enough. There are no guarantees, right? There are no promises of anything. Something happens. It's not a matter of did it happen, it's how we respond. An effective response goes a lot farther to me in managing resiliency than having the best tools in the world.
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead, John.
If I may, and to kind of summarize what I think we both just said was we've always been told we have to enable the business, right? Well, cyber resiliency enables operational resiliency.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
When we put it in that terms, we're much more likely to get funding and attention and understanding than we are I need this to keep uptime in IT to this. Nobody cares. I need this to ensure the business can deliver on its promises to our customers. That's a different conversation with your CFO.
Both of you are segueing perfectly into the next question, which is either on the product or program side, right? You can pick your poison, but asking you both, what are the top 3 fundamentals that CISOs today really should build from to really address resiliency within their program? John, you mentioned a couple of things just now that says that I don't know how much newer CISOs are made aware of this. But you said something that's very cliche for those that have been there and done that for some time, which is that security has to be an enabler, not a disabler, right? And that's there's still, even in 2025 today, and I think many of you can appreciate this, there's still many sheriffs that are coming into power, in security programs that are just trying to stop and prevent because they're wearing the badge. Right. But as we move into a world where resiliency says, listen, nothing is really secure because if there's a deliberate and intended and well-funded attacker or threat actor, they're going to get in. Right. So how do you, going back to John's points at the onset of the program, how do you respond and react and recover? Right. And that adds a new element that I think that we haven't dealt with as an industry, as it just secure, protect, defend. Right. So the question again for this third branch of the conversation is fundamentals. When it comes to resiliency in this new day and age, what are some of the advice that you give, even some new CISOs that are coming into the space in order to really build a resilient program or a resilient product? John, we'll go back to you.
I think number one, you have to have a strategy. If you don't have a strategic approach to it, it doesn't matter what tactical things you try to piece together. So, there's got to be a strategy. You have to know and understand what is the outcome you're trying to achieve. So if you start with that, and, I'd say, I give the outcome of establish and maintain a modern information security program that protects the technology environment and digital assets of the organization. That as an outcome, now you get any business leader, you give them that as the outcome that you're working towards. They go, okay, I'm with that. So now, if you do that, that outcome, you've got a strategy and a strategic approach. You've got an outcome defined. Now, what you've got to have is what's the value I'm going to deliver to the organization. I'm going to ensure, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of systems. And here's what that means. It means that we are going to be able to meet or achieve where we're going to monitor the effectiveness and efficiency of this operations. And you got to have a certain set of metrics, that at least a starter set of metrics. How are you going to measure whether or not you're delivering the value and achieving that outcome? And how well are you working towards achieving that outcome? But also being able to understand measure the maturity of the program. Whether you are starting from scratch or whether you are trying to course correct an organization. And that's what people don't understand, but you also have to know your stakeholders. Spend some time getting to know your stakeholders, because every member of the organization is your stakeholder, whether you believe it or not, or whether you understand that, because you are there to help protect and prevent impact to them, but also, should it occur, respond and recover. So know and understand who you're working with and who you work for and why you do it.
Platinum points by John Sapp right there. Brent, you did provide some recommendations, on the the question on whether product security was relative, and you took it back to the program. You added some good points. I wanted to just get your take, obviously, on what are some of the three fundamentals that you see that CISOs aren't doing today to kind of lend to embracing a lot of the things that John just put down, or to even really kind of espouse this idea of a resilient program.
Yeah, I mean, I think 100% agree with what John just added. I think the piece I would add to that is make sure, always had this with my teams, both those underneath me, around me, beside me. You should have a deck at the ready that you can articulate your program at any point in time in 5 minutes. You pull it up, and I'm going to explain to you what I do. If you can't explain to me where you're at, where you've come from, what you've done, and where you're going, and you can't do it under 5 minutes, and you don't have that deck already built, I'll say you're behind, right? So you should have that. It should be so well known, and you need that for a couple reasons. So that your board understands that, your peers understand that, and your team understands that. It can't be complex. It's got to absolutely has to have measurements and the ability way for you to monitor things. But you have to have a vision you can clearly articulate, and it has to be well documented, and has to paint a vision of the future and explain why that's where we need to go. Convince people, And I think the way you do that, not to reiterate what John said, I'm going to add to it is, relationships matter. How close are you to your general counsel? How close are you to the head of your business for product area? How close are you to your peer cohorts in the industry that you can lean on for advice, when the bad days happen, on those things, or how they solve problems. So focus on building relationships. It's not just about executing. You have to have people that you're ingrained with, that you can explain your vision to, that will help you articulate, that will help you figure out a way to enhance and improve it. To me, another key component there I highly recommend for CISOs, especially in this day and age, is agility. You got to be able to bend and move, and you don't, the challenges we're facing in 25, 26 look nothing like the challenges we were up against in 22, 23, right? And in just a couple of years, AI and everything, the game's changing fast. So if you live in a world where you have sacred cows and products or processes or teams you've built that come hell or high water, that's my thing, and we don't change that or touch that, that's a mistake, right? Everything's evolving. It's evolving at a pace that's going to be very challenging to keep up with. So we've got to move fast, fail fast, fix fast, evolve fast. And so to me, learning to be agile and roll with it, not resist it. To me, the Department of No doesn't exist, as we've all seen over the years. It doesn't work. So if your business is saying I need to go here, and you're saying, no, we're not going there, we're not going to use the cloud, or we're not going to leverage AI, it's just a matter of time until you're out of that role, and they'll find somebody that will. The answer is not we're not going. The answer is how do we go as securely as we possibly can.
Well, you guys are dropping dimes today. We're going to close out in this last segment, which is hot takes. Now, let me define what a hot take is, because oftentimes, that word is used, and it's not. This is a dirty cybersecurity podcast. We get dirty. There's no apologies that are needed. Say what's on your mind. And there's definitely, having been, a veteran in your respective areas, right, and leadership, executive leadership, I'm sure there's some things where there's some hot takes that you have, stored up. So I will mention that I see a lot of hot takes. Some of them are good. Some of them are questionable. Some of them make you scratch your head on LinkedIn as CISOs take the mic, the social media mic per se, and they say things like, password vaults are not necessary. It's just as secure to write them down in a book. That was actually a conversation that was going on LinkedIn for a couple of weeks ago before RSA. I would love to get your hot takes on what sort of things, hot takes on what works, hot takes on some things that are absolutely, they're solicited as they're, a godsend, but they actually don't work. So now that I've kind of done a preamble to kind of get your, creative juices going on what is a hot take, I'm going to go back to you, John. And usually when you and I get together, we're at the Red Phone booth here in Atlanta, not too far away, with a nice bourbon or something like that. And so it naturally, it creates an environment for hot takes. But what sort of hot takes do you have that really would be game changing? What would be thought provoking for our audience and listeners out there?
Man, to see right now, I need a bourbon and a good cigar for this one.
Let's do it.
I would say this. There used to be this thing. It was, when mobile apps was first becoming a real big thing, and I saw somebody with a T-shirt. There's an app for that, and now there's an agent for that, and it's the whole concept of AI it's rapidly exploding. I saw something that there was like 30,000 new agents over the last month or two, something like that. So that this stuff is happening quickly, and the problem I have is this. You think about things like Streamlit. People want to build apps really fast, really quick. Oh, I can do this with AI. I can do all this cool stuff, right? And I've got all the security guardrails, built in. I call bullshit. Because you get into this conversation and you start talking. You ask like threat modeling. Have you considered what the threats are to that data, to that system? What's the criticality to the business? And we now all of a sudden everything is code and everybody's a developer, and you don't need. And I think that's my hot take is we are going to find ourselves in a place where everybody thinks that they can build code, and they're going to do it because they're going to it's going to be in the name of, well, I'm increasing my productivity, I'm increasing my efficiency. Yeah, you're also increasing the attack surface.
Right. That's definitely a great hot take. I think we all we can definitely see that there's a false sense of security happening with AI adoption, a lack of AI hygiene, and AI data governance that's happening, and it's going to have consequences in the near term. Brent, your hot take.
Yeah, I mean, I think just piggyback on that a little bit there. One good author I like, Elijah Goldratt. He wrote The Goal. He wrote Critical Chain. Talks about sure, you just got more efficient on coding, but by the way, you're going to create a downstream impact and mess, whether it comes to security or other things we've got to do. We've got to repair and fix that long term. So it's short-term pain, short-term gain, long-term challenges in that type of world. So being focused on what's the end goal. The end goal is not to be the most efficient, effective coder. Again, the end goal is to enable the business, and so that has to be multifaceted, including security. My hot take is, man, I get so frustrated seeing CISOs argue with each other on what's right or wrong. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm in Florida, right? If I want to get to Texas, there's multiple ways to get there. I can get on an airplane and be there in a couple hours. I can get and people tell me that's the best way. I can get there in a car. If I'm trying to take a camper or something like that, maybe that's the best approach. But people argue with me I should be flying. I can't fly with a camper. Or if I could take a boat, and people, why would you take a boat? It's too slow. It's there. Well, if I'm transporting oil, it makes a lot of sense to me to take a boat. So people too often, this is the way we do it. People are wrong if they don't do it this way, whether it's zero trust or whatever else you want to say. You're wrong, right? So the answer is there's multiple ways to solve every problem out there. You have a way to solve a problem, and congratulations. That doesn't make other solutions wrong. It makes them different. So stop arguing with the people who are on your same team trying to defend the world against bad things, right? Let's go focus on the bad guys and talk about that and what they're doing and how we defend against. But it has to be this. This is the best way. This is the only way. This is the main way. I get so frustrated with that conversation.
That's a good hot take. I got to jump in on this one. My hot take is simply that there's a lot of security sheep. I use that term a lot. There's a lot of whatever the populace agrees on, then they basically say this is the way. So it's actually, I think in anything, right, you have the pendulum swing to extremes. You have either the overcritical trolls, right, that are always criticizing what you're doing or what you're not doing and how it's not conforming to what they've done. On the other side, you have the security sheep, which is that they're not, thinking about strategy. They're not thinking about their own threat model. They want to be able to take the easy route and just simply say, well, let me go into a group think and let me just come out of that with that as my plan. And that's, we all live in different cities. I'm in Atlanta, you're in Tampa, John's in Austin, and we don't basically get together and share how we're securing our respective homes, our properties, right, from different threats, because the threats in DeKalb County, Fulton County, or wherever county you guys are in, it can be very different, right? So we are going to use the different intel, the news sources that we get, the next, social media, information that the neighbors, partake in and things like that, in order to say, okay, this is what we have to do. So my hot take and frustration oftentimes is seeing that there's a lack of forethought in going into leading programs, whether it be a security program or a product program. And there's just a kind of a group think that can it definitely lead to be non-strategic. So, we hear so many adages in security. You never get hired by hiring insert, big global consulting firm or whatnot. But I think that at the end of the day, risk is relative. And securities need to be commensurate to what are we protecting? What's our unique attack surface? So that's my hot take there. Any last words, John and Brent, before we conclude? We're going to wrap up here. I really do appreciate y'all's both perspective. I mean, like I said, I think this is a super treat for all of our listeners and viewers out there. But any closing thoughts, one-liners, John?
Not just knowledge, know-how.
Oh, I like that.
New CISOs need to think about that. It's not just about knowledge, what you got out of a book. It's about know-how, because you have to know how to get to the outcome that you're trying to pursue. And I will, a source. So I used to work for Coopers & Lyman. Georgia Pacific used to be my client, and that was the tagline: not just knowledge, know-how, and that stuck with me throughout the course of my career. And so.
That needs to be on a shirt. That's a good shirt right there. Brent, what about you?
Boy, you want a one-liner? I don't know. Ours is not to teach, but to enable. Right? We spend too much time trying to tell people about risk. We're enabling them. We're enabling them to be effective as practitioners, as business people, as teammates, as employees, securing the world, et cetera. I mean, to me, that's a big piece.
Awesome. I love it. John Stapp, everyone. Brent Houck, appreciate it. Dirty South Security Podcast, episode 11, signing off. Appreciate it, everybody. Take care.
All right.